Hi, this is Jordan, updating you on my Pheidole colony. The setup has changed a bit since my last video. I've since moved the colony out of the old habitat nest and into this brick nest here. This nest, if you remember, was the nest I used to house my Iridomemex Bicknelli colony in before I released them. In order to get the colony to move out, what I did was attach up the new nest and watered it very well and covered it from any light while I stopped watering the old nest and exposed it to light, and the ants immediately started relocating. It's important to cycle your colonies like this as it prevents harmful mold and bacteria from taking over your nests, which can really endanger the health of your colonies pretty fast. Eventually, after giving it a good clean, I connected up the old nest again. So I cleaned it by removing the glass and just soaking it in vinegar, and used the garden hose to rinse it all off. And after it was dry, I just glued the glass back on and attached it up. You can see they haven't made great use of it, only really using it for some of their pupae here. I watered both nests quite evenly, but they much preferred the brick nest. I think it's due to the nest being more water retentive, so they prefer that moist environment. Here's two of the three queens of the colony. I find the queens are often bunched up like this, although I rarely ever see all three together for whatever reason. The ants were in this setup for a couple months and were doing really well, but eventually I decided to alter their setup again. For some time I've been considering creating a naturalistic setup for my ants that not only my ants would appreciate, but would look really nice too. So after some researching, I began building a terrarium. So this is what I came up with. I wanted to go with a desert theme. I've got some succulents and a few cacti in there at the moment, and I'm probably going to be altering it later on, adding in more plants and rocks, pebbles, maybe even a layer of sand as well, something that will contrast the plants well, and also the ants as well, to help them stand out a bit better. After I was satisfied with the way the terrarium looked, I then introduced the ants. So what I did was move the whole colony into this single nest and just place it inside the terrarium. I just allowed for one exit point through this tube here. That way I could channel the ants out in one direction and influence where they would construct their first nesting site. I wanted it to be close to the front of the terrarium, that way I could observe them more easily and perhaps might even see them create chambers up against the glass. The colony started digging straight away, several locations at first, but eventually they all converged on one site, this one right at the end of the tube here. And after only about an hour or so of digging, they began moving in the brood. And since then I've been just watering the entrance of their nest just to encourage them to move the remainder of their brood in. I've been keeping the brick nest covered up from the light for now. I wanted to give the colony a chance to dig out some decent sized chambers before exposing them to the light and encouraging them to move out entirely. I plan on moving the brick nest out eventually, but I'll probably just leave it there for now, for as long as they're making use of it. So with this setup, I obviously won't be able to see what's going on in the nest anymore. I won't be able to see what the queens are up to, how much brood there is, and new workers are closing and whatnot, but honestly I'm quite content with just watching the ants forage and build upon their new nests. I actually did even get a glimpse of one of their underground chambers here, which they've filled up with some pupae. They soon abandoned this chamber though. I suspect they built it overnight and didn't realize it would be exposed to light during the day. So when sunlight came, they just moved elsewhere. This glass tank is quite big. It's almost 1 meter long and half a meter wide, so the ants have plenty of room to explore. It's really quite cool watching them forage around, climbing plants to drink honey off their leaves and creating foraging trails which weave in and around the rocks and the plants, and also watching them form new nest entrances. I was observing this soldier ant here for quite some time, and he was being super productive, slicing off pretty much every limb from this cockroach here. I've noticed the soldiers in general are more active in this new setup. I guess it might be because they have more roles to play now. They've been helping dig tunnels, guarding nest entrances, slicing up food and hauling the food back to the nest as well. Whereas before they rarely left the nest and mainly just acted as repletes. And when they did leave the nest, they were extremely shy fleeing back to the safety of the nest at the first hint of danger. I've been trying to feed the colony as often as I can. I used to feed them mealworms that I'd buy from a local pet store, but recently the store's closed down, so instead I've been searching the garden for insects to feed them, which is good in a way, because they get whatever it is that I find, and so consume a variety of different foods, which is probably a lot better for them than just eating the same meal over and over. It is more time consuming for me to go out and search for food for them, but it's not too much of a hassle, as this is my last colony, so I don't need to worry about feeding multiple colonies like I did in the past. Given this is my last colony, I'm really hoping they do well in this new environment. So far they look to be quite happy with the new space, and I've hardly ever seen any ants climbing up the glass, which is a good sign they're content with the environment. So if you're into ant keeping, I highly recommend giving a naturalistic setup like this a go. They're relatively cheap and easy to make and maintain, and they look great as well. So that's the end of the video. Thanks for watching, and I hope you got something out of this.